Welcome to Connecting to Admired Leadership, where twice a month we explore the behaviors and routines that make great leaders extraordinary. I'm Wes Bender, and I have the distinct pleasure of hosting some of our firm's partners, coaches, and clients to discuss leadership in ways you won't hear anywhere else. Let's dive into this episode and make people and situations better together. I have with us today, she's back for more, Diana Hong, speaking to a different topic today. Diana is one of our executive coaches and also serves as a partner in our firm, CRA Admired Leadership. So with that said, Diana, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself. You've answered this question before, but who are you and what are you currently loving? I know I didn't set you up for that, but what are you currently loving related to your work? And then we'll dive into this topic.
Sure, that sounds great. Nice to meet everybody. I'm Diana Hong. As Wes mentioned, I'm a partner at CRA Admired Leadership, and I do quite a bit of executive coaching as well. I'll make my bio very brief and then just get into what I love the most about our work. So my bio is that I've been in this space for about 20 plus years, both in terms of being a leader myself through multiple layers in financial services first, and then as an executive coaching consultant in this space. So there's a lot of this where I feel that what's exciting is to look back at my younger self, frontline supervisor in her earlier mid-20s and look back at baby Diana almost and say, oh, if you only knew these things then, how more amazing your career could have been before, right? But to be able to connect the dots and also work with people who are early, mid, and senior in their careers and essentially take things that can be very conceptual and very personal, like your leadership style and approach and your communication and how you establish trust in relationships, and then turn that into something where you actually see results in your day-to-day interactions, in how you handle stakeholders and how you handle direct reports and how you manage up. All of that is really exciting to me. So thanks for that.
Awesome. I love it. And I would love to meet baby Diana one day, for sure. That sounds magical. All right, so we're talking about trust, and I want to dive right in because I don't know that we've had as deep a wide a topic as trust and the many facets of building trust and what that means. At the same time, it's a bit of a buzzword too. There's a lot that's been written about trust because people absolutely understand you can move a lot faster. And in a lot of ways, you can make a lot more money. You can better utilize resources if you move with trust. So my first question, Diana, in the large sandbox of trust, how do you think about trust? And again, what I'm trying to get after with everyone today is understanding how important trust is in our relationships, personal and professional, and give some practical nature to how we think about it and how we can build better trust. So just right off the bat, when you hear trust, how do you think about that? How should we think about trust in general?
Yeah, I think the first thing I say is that trust is not all or nothing, right? And I think, most people, they figure out where they are in a relationship, whether it's a work relationship or a personal relationship, and they figure out how much trust or whether they have trust or not at all, when they come to a situation where that trust has been challenged, right? So it's easy to see where, oh, I actually don't trust this person, or this person doesn't trust me when things fall apart or things don't go well. But I don't know how much of us spend time really thinking about where exactly in the trust space am I sitting with this relationship with this person? Because there's a lot of different nuances. You could trust your CPA to do your taxes and advise you on your taxes, but you may not trust them to be your babysitter. I don't know, if your CPA is your relative, maybe so. I don't know. But, most of us have very siloed ways that we give our trust. We trust people to do one thing or a constellation of things. But when you think about yourself as a leader, and whether you're a formal leader at work or you're an informal leader, opinion leader, you've got lots of friends and communities that you're a part of, I think you really have to think about trust strategically, right? And you have to really examine your relationships and not just assume I have it or I don't, but think about, how do I build trust across and outside of specific expertise areas so that it's really deep and it actually helps further the relationship and conversation and candor that you have going forward.
That's awesome. Okay, so as we think about trust in that way, so we send a field note. So if you're not a subscriber to our field notes, just daily nuggets that go out absolutely free that our firm writes in regards to just leadership nuggets. We sent a field note out ahead of this. If you haven't seen that field note, I'm dropping it in the chat box right now. And it is titled, "What level of trust do you experience?" So could you frame out those levels of trust for us? Because it really takes us a little bit deeper in order to in how we can think about trust practically, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I go in order, so that first level of trust that's defined in the field note, it's really about you meet someone, and I would call it rapport. You have some sense of like, okay, this person might be someone I want to have another conversation with, right? So the door doesn't close right there. And it could be everything from first impressions to rapport to having a mutual interest, whatever it is, an introduction could be made. There's all sorts of different ways that initial trust is established. One thing I'll say about that though is that it's pretty fragile, this trust, right? The first layer. So you can meet someone and say, "Oh, they seem like a good person," and then you hear something else about them. You may not even have another interaction, and you go, "Oh, I don't really know about that person anymore. The next time they reach out, I'm going to avoid their outreach," right? So that first level of trust, it's necessary, but it is also very fragile. So you can start thinking about, how do you build on that? And when you think
Mhm.
about building on that, lots of people think about, how do I show up consistently? So you could have a very favorable first impression. And then if the second and third impression is, wow, this person seems like a completely different person every time I talk to them, I can't rely on them as a person to come through, to be consistent, to show up, things like that. I mean, though that really gets into your trust of how can I rely on this person to be the same person, quite frankly, every day, right? People love predictability. There's another layer of trust too, where you start thinking about, are they actually good at what they do? And good at the interaction they have with you. So I'll go back to the example of if my tax accountant isn't very good at taxes, we're never going to reach that level of trust. I'll quickly say goodbye, right? Because that seems to be necessary. Um, and then the fourth is really where you get to a level of safety and emotional trust. You trust them with your vulnerabilities. You start opening up. You start saying, beyond the workspace, let me share a little bit with you of why something's so important. Or here's a little bit about my background and what's happened. And, here are some of the important people in my life. Or here's a very sensitive topic that I was hesitant to bring up until now. But now that we've established some trust around who you are and how reliable and consistent you are, and the fact that you are actually competent, right? Now I feel a little bit safer, and you've created that safety as well for me to start opening up with a little bit more vulnerability. And so that's really the fourth level of trust. And the last one's this sense of, intimacy, and also being able to rely on them going forward, right? So that I will actually have mutual reciprocity. I'll have common goals. I'll start building next actions and steps and work in personal relationships. That's when it starts becoming something where you're building a friendship or you're building a relationship together. You have the sense of, what you do matters to me and what I do matters to you. And that's really the ultimate level of trust.
So I always have personal examples that come to mind, and I always love sharing a personal example because always want people to understand about admired leadership, that we're not teaching techniques or just little things you can do to get what you need out of people. This is truly about being a better leader in every space that you show up. So we actually tell people, if you're gonna build deeper trust with your employees, you need to practice some of those same behaviors in your personal life, social life, as you would, so it becomes just part of your natural leadership acumen in some way. So I always have some personal examples that come in. I'm always dangerous in sharing personal examples when you're on, because you're such a great coach that you'd always have some ways I could improve as well. But I'm going to tell this story, and I want to tee you up, if you can. Is there some kind of case study or story with some of our clients where this conversation of trust really made a big difference? So if you could think about that for just a second, that'd be awesome. So my son, my 16-year-old, I've been trying to get off of his phone in a lot of ways. So we're monitoring screen time and pickups, and there's lots of neat tricks you can do there. And he came back to me when I was, saying, how long you've been on your phone. He said, well, mom was on her phone, just as much as I was, right? You laugh, I know. And I told him, I said, his name's Jackson. I said, Jackson, you don't understand. I implicitly trust your mom. She can do whatever she wants to do because I know her intentions. I know she puts others in this family more. And I turned to him, I said, you do not have that implicit trust with me yet. And then went on to tell him some behaviors that he could build that trust with me, right? And it immediately played out to some things that he would get. So there was some extrinsic motivation there, but certainly there's some intrinsic things that happen and certainly some inspiration and that kind of stuff along the way. But I told him, I said, your mom can do whatever she wants to do because I implicitly trust. And those types of relationships play out just incredibly in the workplace. So could you give us an example of when the trust conversation takes root, what that could mean for organizations and leaders across the board?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, and I'll talk about two coaching scenarios that have recently come up. It's really that blend between, I guess we would call it the third, fourth, and fifth level of trust, right? So the idea of being trusted for competence, being, that you can do what it is that you do well, but versus being trusted in an emotional or a psychological safety kind of way. So opening up with vulnerability versus being trusted in a truly mutual, we got to rely on each other, we got to work on this together, through this together way. And I think what happens is that a lot of people get into work situations where, because you have to create and collaborate on things together with a colleague or with your direct reports or with other people in the organization, you assume you're at level 5, but you actually haven't done the work for level 4 and level 3, and they kind of all build on each other, right? And then what happens, and this happened recently with a coachee of mine, is that they came to me very, very upset over a recent conversation where it wasn't as blatant as having their team thrown under the bus, but there was a flavor of it. There was a little bit of a disagreement about where to go in a larger meeting. The other leader had said something to the tune of, well, we're really sort of waiting on your team to complete XYZ. This coachee felt like they had already had a lot of those conversations together about what needed to happen, in what order, why, and felt that it was almost gratuitous, that bringing this up was a way of saying, well, it's not our fault, it's their fault, right? And they felt almost betrayed, I think, would not be speaking too strongly of it, because they felt like they had built this mutuality. Like they felt like, we have so many projects together, we got to work together, and we've built this mutual sense of, he thought, trust. And we're unpacking this. And then I find out things like they never really talk about off work topics together. So I said, okay, well, who are the most important people to that other leader? Oh, well, I assume their family. All right, great. So who are their family? I don't know. I don't know. So it's almost like they had skipped ahead to try to act like they were at level 5 because of their roles, but they never even put in, on either side, to be fair, they never even put in the effort to try to build up through, who are you as a person, and do you feel safe with me? And can we talk about things that, and not all the time, but, occasionally, can we talk about things that are worrying us or stressing us, or the other things outside of work, and that idea of building up. And so when push came to shove, obviously in this meeting, it was really sort of an aha moment where the coachee said, okay, so I don't have the level of trust I thought I did. And part of that's on me. So now I have to go back and I have to make a concerted effort to make sure that we're not just assuming and skipping ahead to this fact that we are, allies at work together on this project. And really, I do have to put in the time and the effort to reach out and just say, hey, how you doing? Let's get to know each other a little bit more. I know that this project's really important to you, but what else is on your plate? Just because I care about this project because I'm related to it doesn't mean I shouldn't care about other things on your plate. Let's actually talk about that too. So that was the beginning of that person going back and trying to really rebuild that relationship. So that's one example.
That's fascinating. And so it's a testament to this idea, and correct me if I'm wrong, that words or just being positioned on a team or a role that I have none of those things foster trust. Real behaviors in what I do in my interactions is what truly fosters trust. So you can't just act like it's there. You've got to do some things.
Yeah, and I think I used the word fragile earlier, and I think that's really what it is that, you get this temporary trust with anyone you automatically work with or are assigned to, rely on, for instance, right? But it's trust that is very, very fragile and very easily broken. So it's not real trust. It's not something that's been built up layer by layer and sort of can stand the stresses of any challenges along the way. It's this kind of, well, you're in a role and I'm in a role and we work for the same company or we work for the same organization. So I will lend you the a presumption of trust, right? But that
Mhm.
again, when you have two different people, two different teams, there's always a moment where someone just feels a little differently about what we should do going forward. And
Yeah.
that creates a little bit of conflict. And then that conflict is usually where you see, do we actually have the trust that it takes in this relationship, or have we kind of just moseying along feeling like we're assigning each other trust, but we haven't really earned it?
So there's an old Ben Stiller movie that comes to mind, Meet the Fockers. Have you ever heard of that movie
I've never
before?
heard of it. Yes.
Her father-in-law is Robert De Niro, and Robert De Niro goes to Ben Stiller's character who's about to marry his daughter, and he says, "You need to understand that there's a circle of trust, and here's all the things you need to do to be in the circle of trust. And you do one thing wrong, and you're out of the circle of trust." And he makes this big deal of if you know what movie I'm talking about in the audience, if you would drop that in the chat box, just so I don't feel completely left out. But what I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, Diana. We've all found ourselves for whatever reason outside of the circle of trust for someone, whether it's something that we did with maybe the best intentions, but it wasn't the right thing or wasn't what they Meet the Parents. That's right. Meet the Fockers was the sequel. Thank you, Amy Smith. You absolutely won. That's awesome. Uh, what are some things, and I'm putting you on the spot here, what are some things we can do to get back into the circle of trust? Or maybe it's just some things to really establish trust at the get-go of relationships. Does any practical things come to mind related to how we build or how we get back into trust with people?
Yeah. I think part of it is getting to understand the other person. And I mean, beyond the whole getting to know you kind of conventional wisdom. So, truly deep understanding. So, in other words, what really motivates this person? What is their success and failure riding on? Do you know those, right? What motivates them sort of long term in their career, outside of work, things like that? Do they have any passion projects or causes that they believe in, very that they dedicate their discretionary time to? Do they have specific mentors and key people in their lives beyond their immediate family too, that you would say have an impact and influence on them? And I say this not to say that you need to go, full private investigator on people or anything. Uh, but just imagine that, if you understand someone to that level, you're going to be able to actually, share information with them that they need, that's valuable to them, that actually is in the line of all the things that they're already interested in. And the thing about relationships too is that relationships are usually reciprocal. So if you make the first move and you're clearly paying attention to these things and you're asking about these things and you're following up on these things, then that opens the door for the other person to do so with you as well. And you'll never reach reciprocity unless there is that kind of two-way opening and sharing first, right? So, I call it a relational bid, but it's got to be, the first bid has to come down to somebody. Might as well be you, right? That's why you're a leader and that's why you're interested in this kind of stuff. And it's on you to take that first step and open the door and say, hey, tell me more about yourself. Or, oh, you mentioned this. How did that go? Or you seem really passionate about this. Tell me more. Like, where does that come from? And so that idea of getting to really understand people, I think is certainly step number one.
Yeah.
Um, and then, beyond that, I think in terms of repairing, fractured trust or broken trust, I think there's nothing so much as just frankly having a conversation about the actual relationship, right? So if you were with a coworker and you felt like you came to heads over something, taking a step back and being like, okay, great. We've had the conversation about the thing. We may or may not come to an agreement or compromise about it, but how are we doing? Is there anything we should be doing differently to communicate more often, to be a little bit clearer ahead of these things, to do debriefs or anything like that? Is there anything you and I need to be doing to start, making sure that our conversations and trust and relationship is building up well enough so that we're never as much at loggerheads, right? Because we want to make sure that we're productive and working well together. And so that idea about having a conversation about the relationship sometimes is a key thing, and not just about the things that are coming up that both of you guys have to tackle.
Hmm. So to some people, I'm going to tee you up at this question and then drop some things in the chat box if anybody is interested in following up. But I was talking to somebody just last week about this, and it does not come naturally to them to be curious of other people. It does not come naturally to them to ask questions in a way that of genuine curiosity of who they are, get to know them better, all those kind of things. And so they were trying to come up with some ways to kind of write some things down to remember, right? And those kind of stuff. So we talk about that with some people sometimes, and they say, well, that seems creepy. It seems creepy to learn about these people and then write things down and to set reminders for me to ask about it in order to build trust. They would say things like, if that just doesn't come naturally to me, I don't even want to try because it won't come across correctly. So I'd love for you to speak to that a little bit. I'm going to drop three things in the chat box if anybody's interested. We have a lot of events coming up for the rest of the year. We're taking these webinars on the road. We're going to be in Chicago, Connecticut, Philadelphia, and Atlanta throughout the rest of the year. Diana is going to be speaking in Chicago in a couple of weeks. Kind of picture this kind of webinar setting, but live and in person, which we're excited about doing. There's lots of other things you can check out there, so I'll drop that in the events. I'm also going to drop our field notes link. If you don't get our daily field notes, I highly encourage you signing up for those. And then finally, if you want to book some time to kind of have some follow-up discussion, obviously, we're having lots of great conversations every week with folks who are interested in bringing this kind of conversation in a very customized way, either to their personal growth or for their teams or their organization as well. We'd love to connect with you as well. So I'll drop that in the chat box. As I do that, Diana, could you speak a little bit to how to, if being curious about people doesn't come natural, how do I get after that, especially in a way that doesn't feel creepy, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I've also heard occasionally the pushback that, if not precisely the worry about being creepy, but sometimes the worry about being ungenuine, right? That it feels very manufactured.
Much better political word. Thank you for correcting me.
Well, I'd like to think we're not encouraging people to go be creepy. Yes.
That's
I think
hilarious.
one of the ways that I ask people to think about it is the relationships that people have, generally you're already putting in extra effort where you care, right? So if for instance I were to ask you, well, what is your mother's birthday? You probably know it, you probably remind yourself about it, you probably have, some kind of calendar thing, that's going to come up and, and you're doing that not because you want to be intrusive in your mother's life, right? You're doing that because you want to have a trigger to remind, oh, that's right, I want to do something for my mother. So the intention is real, and the intention is something about building the relationship and building the trust. The intention is not to go stalk the person or be ungenuine or anything like that, right? So I'll say that the behavior of actually writing things down and trying to be disciplined about your relationships and curiosity radar about them, that it's just the other side of the coin where you think about, is it coming from a place of trying to do good and trying to add value to the relationship and trying to be helpful and caring and show up for those times? And if that's the case, then that's what defines it as not creepy and not ingenuine, right? So I think if we can switch the reserve that we have about somehow the behavior itself is the issue, that's not it. It's where you're coming from with the behavior. That really defines the purpose of it. And so as long as it's something where you're like, well, I actually do want to build a relationship and build trust with this person, and that part is genuine, and all I need are these reminders and ways to make sure that I just, the head is a terrible place to keep things. So if I can just make sure that there's a disciplined way that I have to go about that, then that I think is actually, the purest form of wanting to invest into the relationship.
Yeah, I love that. So I want to just kind of re-articulate some things that I've heard you say, and then let you have just some final thoughts for everybody, if you do. So I loved the concept that you gave us around taking a step back and thinking about what level of trust do I have? And I love what you gave us is thinking about it in a way that says, how fragile is my trust? If they did one thing wrong, would that be it? Or if they did, would they have to do multiple things wrong? I think that gives some practicality to how we sense what kind of level of trust that we have with people, for sure. I love some of the real practical things you gave us to get back in the circle of trust, as Robert De Niro would say, in that having a high curiosity radar in regards to really asking people and following up with people and that kind of thing. Curiosity radar, for those who don't know, is a real foundational concept of our entire firm and leadership in general, for sure. And then how do we do that in a way that is, I'm going to use my creepy word again, that's not creepy. I think I love the concept of stepping back and saying, with what intent am I doing this? With what intent am I doing? Am I doing this because I really do want to experience a deeper level of friendship, relationship, trust with this individual, so we together can go someplace that we wouldn't be able to go without trust? Or is my intent one of, I'm just trying to progress my own career, or I need to get something out of this person? If that's the case, it is going to come across disingenuous in some ways as well. Those are some pretty solid core practical things that we've gotten on again, a topic that's very deep and wide. Any last minute closing thoughts, encouragement, or anything for everyone on the call today from one of the, my opinion, world's best executive coaches?
The only other thing I'll put in is to reinforce something that you said about how strong is the trust in a relationship, right? And a helpful metaphor I have to think about it, and that I've shared with other coaches before, is this idea of, whether you think about an investment portfolio or a diet, right? So you're going to spend most of your time or money or efforts on a thing, right? If it's a balanced investment portfolio, then if one thing gets a little rocky, that's fine. It'll weather the storm, right? So if you've got a lot of frequency, a lot of interactions, if you've got history underneath you, if you've shown up for the person in many different ways, if you've got different levels of trust and you've earned your way to the highest level, one thing happens, that's fine. You will be able to work through it, and that trust will essentially endure. It's when you haven't built out the breadth or the depth of that portfolio, so to speak, right? That the trust is fragile then. And I think too often we just assume that wherever we're at is good, and that represents we have breadth, when really it's just in a single narrow way. We've always talked about this project together, so of course the person trusts me. Well, no, they trust you for that project, right? And then other things happen, and that could be pretty fragile then. So how do you create all these interactions and all these other ways of getting to know each other and trusting each other so that it can weather the storm? I talked about diet too. If you only ate, chicken, right? And that you ate no other food, well, then when there's a chicken shortage, you're going to be pretty hard up for having some nutrition, right? So again, think about feeding relationships in kind of the same way. Is there a healthy, balanced diet that you're feeding the relationship? Are there different ways that you guys are interacting so you can really build up these muscles of trust with each other?
I love that. We are at the top of the hour. Diana, as always, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you taking the time to join us, and appreciate all the incredible things you do for us and our firm at CRA Admire Leadership. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Have a great rest of the day. And Diana, I am officially moved into spectacular.
Glad you're feeling great.
All right, everybody, have a great day. Thanks, Diana.